the dawn of the Cold War, America develops a long-range bomber to defend the free world. It is the B-52 Stratofortress, a plane that can still deliver a 13-ton payload to any target on the globe.
The destructive power of the B-52 strike truly has to be seen to be believed.
(1961). Tensions rise as the Berlin Wall separates East from West like never before.
There will be further setbacks before the tide is turned, but turn it we must.
1962. The Cuban Missile Crisis brings mankind to the edge of nuclear annihilation.
It shall be the policy of this nation to regard any nuclear missile launched from Cuba as an attack by the Soviet Union on the United States, requiring a full retaliatory response upon the Soviet Union.
It is a machine born of the Cold War. The B-52 has stood nuclear vigil over an uneasy world for nearly a half-century. Since first taking to flight in 1952, this stark symbol of Armageddon has evolved from a nuclear bomber into one of the most brutal tools in America's arsenal. If the B-52 is the material embodiment of the Cold War, then General Curtis LeMay was its personification. As the architect and commander of Strategic Air Command, or SAC, critics say that LeMay was both brilliant and dangerous, that he hoped to put SAC's nuclear forces to use before Soviet advances challenged American dominance.
Rarely has a man imprinted himself upon an armed service as General LeMay did upon the Strategic Air Command. Everybody in the Strategic Air Command knew General LeMay, if not personally, at least by reputation. Every man wanted to be approved of by him. No one wanted to go see him about an accident or anything. He made SAC in his own image, and it was a very, very elite outfit. Russia was building airplanes as fast as it could. The first heavy bomber that it built was a copy of the B-29. It was advancing, however. We knew that its missile sciences were improving. And so General LeMay had a task. He was tasked to defend the free world from the United States with nuclear bombers.
Favorite line from the movie is, fighters make movies, bombers make history. That's the way it works. You don't win a war by killing a guy one at a time at 30,000 feet like fighters do. You win it by killing lots of guys on the ground all at once, and that's what bombers do.
Despite its utility, the B-52 is likely entering its final days. Of nearly 750 built, less than 100 H-model aircraft are left. Yet it remains one of the most powerful icons of the world's only surviving superpower. The plane was originally designed to deliver the atomic blow. It still can. If called upon, the 52 can wield a variety of nuclear weapons or haul 13 tons of conventional bombs to any target on the globe. Pilots have a nickname for this Leviathan: the Buff.
Obviously, B and U are big and ugly. F stands for fat, and the second F stands for So it's a big, ugly, fat fella.
Global missions require aerial refuelings. In less than 15 minutes, the aircraft can take on 100,000 pounds of its 320,000-pound fuel load, fuel that is stored in over 60 internal bladders. It is an exhausting chore. The 52 is not a nimble machine, and its proximity to an airborne tanker requires intense focus, often leaving the pilot drenched in sweat. with arms that feel like lead. When full, these bladders actually strengthen the integrity of a wingspan that runs 2/3 the length of a football field.
If you look at the airplane, it looks like, you know, virtually the size of a 747, and you'd think there'd be acres of space. You climb in, and you're cheek by jowl with the pilot and co-pilot side by side. Downstairs, the navigator and the radar bombardier are equally close quarters. It's also a matter of funk.
Hot, fragrant. A B-52 smells like nothing else. It smells like a mixture of sweat, old laundry, books, flight lunches from the 1950s, spilled coffee, Coca-Cola that got poured out of a can during a low-level bombing mission, and the contents of the onboard facilities. You kind of mix that whole mess together odoriferous-wise, and you come off a B-52, and the first thing you want to do is you want to shower because you smell like the airplane.
First time you sit in it and you fly it, you think, holy cow, this is a whole lot of airplane to be driving around, and they're going to trust me with it. And you get to looking at it, and literally these airplanes are older than almost everybody who's flying them right now. It's a kind of daunting to think about that there's been generations of guys sitting in that seat before you doing the same thing.
The bomber dates back to the early 1950s, when the Air Force called for a weapon that could carry a 10,000-pound load at over 500 miles an hour deep into the Soviet Union. More than 40 years later, the B-52 has left a legacy unmatched since the B-17, and its reputation for durability is overshadowed only by its legendary maneuverability.
B-52 has 8 engines, and they have the power of 10 locomotives. And there's enough aluminum on the airplane to make 100,000 trash cans, and it's got 10,000 miles of wire, and it flies like 10 locomotives pulling 100,000 trash cans on 10,000 miles of wire. The landing gear on the B-52 is extremely unique. Landing this thing in a crosswind was really wild, because the airplane would actually be flying sideways, and these 8 wheels can be pivoted so that they line up with the runway, even though the airplane isn't. The only airplane in the inventory that ever did this, and this is something that is very, very weird for a pilot to be sitting this way, and the runway's that way, and you're landing that way, not facing the way you're going. This is strange and hard to get used to.
Early models packed 4 50-caliber machine guns in the rear turret. The guns are radar-controlled, and some believe the system outdated. But enemy pilots will later find that the 52's sting is a deadly one.
And so the MiGs would come up behind the B-52 out of the range of their guns, their 23mm cannons. Trouble was they forgot something. They were trying to shoot with a 500-knot headwind. These guns were shooting with a 500-knot tailwind and had a much greater range. So they would come up behind the airplane, the B-52, think they were safe. Goodbye.
1962, and the Cuban Missile Crisis marks the only time in history that Strategic Air Command has ever gone to DEFCON 2, just one step away from full-scale nuclear war. In little more than a decade, SAC had grown from a decrepit skeleton of 300 planes to the most devastating strike force the world has ever seen. Under the guidance of General Curtis LeMay, Bomber Command mushrooms to over 3,000 aircraft and nearly 300,000 men. The centerpiece, the B-52.
It's interesting that as a result of the Cold War, people look at the heavy bomber as a political weapon in some cases, as opposed to, say, a fighter. To a military guy, you're involved in destroying things and taking a life. So how you do it is kind of how many furries can dance on the head of a pin.
After the Cuban Missile Crisis, world leaders never again look at Cold War brinksmanship in the same light. Instead, the superpower conflict confines itself to a different arena, the Third World. By mid-decade, the B-52 finds itself again on the front line, this time joining a battle for which it was never intended in a little-known place called Vietnam. By 1965, President Lyndon Baines Johnson is fully entangled in Vietnam. So too are the men of Strategic Air Command. Here, crews trained to fight a nuclear war stumble and fall. Here, the limits of air power contribute to the greatest defeat of American arms since the birth of the nation.
The bomber generals who ran the Air Force at the beginning of Vietnam had essentially not much knowledge of, and certainly no sympathy with, the whole idea of a limited war. These are men who grew up in World War II, came of age as military leaders, and all of Europe was their target. They knew no bounds. Toward the end of World War II, even civilian targets were open and fair game. They were put under severe strictures as to where they might bomb, when they might bomb, who they might bomb. This ran counter to everything that they had learned. So somebody like LeMay looked at Vietnam and the political restrictions as just a total aberration.
As the ground war heats up in Southeast Asia, this lone wolf nuclear penetrator finds itself doing a job that it was never built to do. But carrying conventional stores is a role to which it readily adapts.
Nothing out there could haul that kind of iron. I mean, 108 bombs on the D model. When you hit what you're aiming at, you really made a mess out of it. And in that respect, it was very successful. As far as getting the job done and being able to carry all of those bombs, there was nothing else that would do the job.
DG. Yes. Stand by to release. Ready now. Bombs away.
By 1966, a program codenamed Big Belly doubles the B-52's punch from 54 to 108 bombs. And although North Vietnam is off-limits to 52 strikes, much of the supply route along the Ho Chi Minh Trail is fair game. Approaching bombers flying in at 30,000 feet are seldom heard by those below.
Stand by for impact.
Without warning, men and women along the trail are caught in an instant thunder of fire and steel. But airstrikes are often thwarted by Vietnamese ingenuity and determination. Entire villages move underground to avoid the bombing, and in spite of the American air onslaught, more supplies move south along the trail with each passing month. They usually fly in cells of 6 aircraft, and just 1 year after entering the conflict, Stratofortress crews are dropping 8,000 tons of bombs a month on suspected Viet Cong targets.
Depending on how long you strung out the bombs, that could be up to miles long. The area where it's hit is just nothing left but holes in the ground. And it sounds like the world's wildest bass drummer gone berserk.
You sometimes think about, well, if I screw up, or if I make a mistake, do I kill a wrong person? Do I kill an innocent person? And you probably do that somewhere along the way. You can't dwell on it too much. You just have to try to do the best you can to make sure you do everything just properly. It's a job that you do.
Gentlemen, in 10 seconds, the time will be 0300 local, 2000 Zulu.
By late 1972, the United States has run out of patience.
3, 2, 1, hack.
American leaders are eager to disengage themselves from an increasingly unpopular war. For the first time, strategic bombing of the North is ordered. The campaign is codenamed Linebacker 2. And at American bases around the region, over 150 B-52s are massed for the attack. On December 18th, crews arrive at their briefings, unaware that the evening's destination is Hanoi.
Bless these crews. Bless their families and loved ones. And let what they do today bring a better tomorrow. Amen.
He told us that the target that night was Hanoi. There was a large elation for all the crew because we thought finally we're going to be able to do something to put an end to this. At the same time, there was also fear because you knew what we were going up against. Once we began hitting the railroad yards in Hanoi, the thermal plants, their storage facilities, they couldn't continue. We wanted to do that. That's why we had that sense of elation when we were told we were going to be able to bomb Hanoi.
In 1964, the bomber generals had urged the targeting of Hanoi and Haiphong Harbor. Now, nearly 10 years later, their demands are finally met. In 10 days, an estimated 1,500 Vietnamese civilians perish. American bomber crews are denounced as war criminals.
I remember writing with a grease pencil on one of the bombs, you know, from Hank with Love. There was probably a little lighter banter than usual, but again, I think that was just to mask the excitement that we were feeling and maybe some fear, I don't know.
The assault is never one-sided. The airspace above Hanoi is the most heavily defended since World War II Berlin. Rings of anti-aircraft guns and SAMs, surface-to-air missiles, surround the city. Surprise is non-existent. Incoming American bombers fly the same routes night after night. Russian intelligence trawlers and North Vietnamese MiGs track them, gauging altitude and airspeed, data which is then forwarded to SAM battery commanders.
With the SAM coming up at a speed of about Mach 4, when it explodes, the fragments go out in approximately a 45-degree cone. So if you're above the SAM explosion, you're in bad shape. So the trick is you want to be even with it or descending when it went off, so the fragments went one way, you went the other. So that's what we had to do. We just pulled the thing into virtually a 90-degree bank and allowed it to fall.
The B-52s are most vulnerable just after bomb release, when making their slow turns back out to sea. 33 Stratofortress crewmen are killed in Linebacker 2. Another 33 are taken prisoner.
In December of '72, I had seen several of our airplanes get hit. You could see them falling out of the sky, and you could hear the beepers, which were emergency beacons from the aircrew members that managed to escape.
I heard this big loud thunk, a big buff, a big explosion, if you will. All my electronics died immediately. The position I have on the B-52 I had then was there was a screen in front of me, and that was my primary indication of where the radars were and spread across the frequency spectrum. And I remember seeing my face in there, saying, this is unusual, I shouldn't see my face in there. And the reason I saw my face is because I was surrounded by fire and I saw my reflection in there. I said, well, this is not a good place to be. So I did not wait for the bailout command. I rotated my arming lever, which kicked the seat back, blew the hatch over my head, and then next thing you know, I was just free-falling. I fell through, must have been a flight of F-4s because it was real noisy. I was spread-eagled, and I could see the low-lying cloud deck below me and the orange glow of bombs going up. I could see the missiles coming up. I popped my life raft, etc., because I wasn't sure if I'd land in water or not, and wound up in a very nice muddy rice paddy. There was a big explosion, and I had landed, it turns out, not very far away from the SA-2 site. And I could see the vans and trucks and people, and I said, this is not a good place to be. I basically then just decided, well, I'm going to hide in a corner in the middle of this rice paddy and make sure nobody finds me. it's kind of funny now if you think about it. At the time, it wasn't funny at all, but one of the things that's in the seat kit is a sea marker dye. And this is to be used if you happen to go down to the ocean, you release it, and it makes a nice mint green spot so people can find you if they're searching for you. And something had gotten into this thing, and there I was lying in a mint green puddle in a rice paddy. And I said, this is not going to be my day.
Like hundreds of other American airmen, Hank Barrows soon finds himself a prisoner at the infamous Hanoi Hilton.
What we have here are some mementos from the war, so to speak, in my little go-home bag. This is genuine Vietnamese Naga hide, I think, but right here we have the pajama tops. Notice the color. Notice the one size fits all right here. I don't wear this stuff anymore for some strange reason, and people ask me why, but I guess I've worn it once too often already. I wore those every day. I had this set, and I had, I believe, a black set or a dark set, so we were able to do our laundry, so to speak, bathing them in the cistern, in the well, with the lye soap on it, and then letting them air dry it. They did get kind of raunchy after a while. We had little rags that we would use to clean ourselves, and when we were allowed to bathe, we would basically go out to the cistern, we would take a rubber bucket, dip it in the well, and dump the water on ourselves. And this is hygiene. You would dump, I have no idea what was in the water, but it was better than not bathing at all. Charlie Brown, a co-pilot, and I spent about 7 days, including Christmas, at the Heartbreak Hotel, which was basically about a 7 by 7 foot cell with 2 concrete slabs on them, leg irons, which fortunately they didn't use on us. We had a blanket, a straw mat, and a bucket. That was our facilities, and we basically stayed in there. When you sit in a situation like that and you think about it, you kind of reflect upon how much you have as a human being when you have absolutely nothing. Nothing in the way of material things, but you have another human being there with you, and you can talk to that human being. It's quite a lot.
Some have been there nearly a decade. Many find their faith in the nation's resolve to get them home badly shaken. But the Christmas bombings of 1972 soon prove they are not forgotten. Despite world condemnation, the bombing continues. By December 28th, few targets of consequence remain. Hanoi has long since expended its supply of SAM missiles, and with their MiG bases blown asunder, the North's once daunting air defenses cease to exist. Now, B-52s rain down their bombs with impunity.
I tried not to think about what we were doing to those people personally, but I tried to think about those friends that I'd lost and the friends that I lost daily. Because we had people get killed daily, airplanes not come back, and when you get back and you see someone come in to clear out a locker, it kind of gave us a little bit of a feeling of, to hell with them, let's do what we've got to do and get this over with.
The mounting devastation forces Northern leaders to return to the bargaining table. Less than a month after the last bomb is dropped, the armistice is signed, but peace with honor is far from victory. In just 2 years' time, all of Vietnam will lie firmly in Hanoi's grasp. By March 1973, the American airmen of the Hanoi Hilton prepare for their final flight in Southeast Asia.
Just to see the 141, just to see the American flag, just to see an American officer and to see a fellow crew member, you felt like giving him a hug. And we basically sat in that aircraft, lit up a cigar, and then when they closed the doors, we went slightly bananas. When we broke the ground on takeoff, we went even crazier. And when they came on the intercom and said, oh, by the way, we just left Vietnamese airspace, we were ecstatic at that point.
For men like Hank Barrows, the war was finally over. But for a nation and its military, the debate over the lessons learned goes on.
We could have nuked the place. We could have turned all of North Vietnam into a glass-floored, self-lighting parking lot. But the price of this would not be simply victory in North Vietnam. Even if we had invaded North Vietnam and taken the place, these people would still be resisting. My son today would probably be in an army that was garrisoning South and North Vietnam. We would still be there. American sons would still be dying, and I don't know where the end to it would have been. So maybe the end that we got was the end we deserved, and at least it's over.
For nearly half a century, alert facilities like this were the stage where B-52 crews waited daily for orders to deliver Armageddon to Russian soil. Now the Cold War standoff is ended and a new era begun. In 1992, a Soviet Bear bomber visited this former SAC base. Russian crew members overnighted in the alert facility. This mission of goodwill followed one made to Russian airspace by American B-52s, a mission far removed from the kind first envisioned by Boeing designers.
It was a revolution in firepower. So the B-52 became, as it was known at the time, SAC's long rifle. It was an accurate instrument that would carry high megaton bombs directly to the heart of the Soviet Union. It was a high-altitude penetrator. It would drop large megaton weapons on one or several targets and return. Over time, the Soviet defenses improved, and so it became necessary to evade those defenses with a low-level bomber. And they created the terrain-following equipment and the forward-looking television and the infrared that enabled it to penetrate at very low altitudes, 300 feet. Difficult for the airframe because flying an airplane at 40,000 feet is far more comfortable and far less stressful than flying at 300 feet.
Although the Cold War has passed into history, the atomic threat has not. Most B-52s can be reconfigured to deliver nuclear weapons in just 15 minutes.
There's still thousands of nuclear weapons out there on the other side, and it's kind of puts a lot of concern in people's minds when you figure that there's a whole lot more countries that have them now since the breakup of the Soviet Union, because the republics all have them. So, you got more countries to deal with, and things may be not quite as stable as they used to be.
3, 2, 1, hack.
Strategic Air Command ceased to exist as of June 1992. Strategic Command is the organization that now integrates all of America's nuclear forces. But just as was done at the height of the Cold War, Stratofortress crews train constantly for the mission that calls on young men to do the unthinkable.
Scatter deck at 500.
It's not an abstract thing for some of us who pull it. It's kind of a scary thing to leave your family at home and go sit alert and knowing, if the horn goes up, you're never going to see them again. You're going to strap on a bomber, fly halfway across the world, do your mission.
In order to expedite the engine start sequence, we used explosive cartridges, controlled explosions, if you will, of gunpowder in cartridges about the size of a very large can inside of each engine, and would fire those off with a huge cloud of smoke and sometimes a little fire, and then pour the JP4 into those engines and get them cranked up and get the systems online. And then you would start decoding the message that was coming out over the radio that you would start copying on your way to there, because you carried a handheld radio, and you start copying this message on the way to the plane, so that when you got there you could decode it and find out if you were really going to war, if it was another exercise.
Train off the nose at about 1 o'clock.
When operating in a nuclear environment, heavy curtains shutter the B-52 cabin. Upon penetrating the target area, EVS monitors become the pilot's eyes. These relay an external television image or a video presentation of the plane's forward-looking infrared sensor.
Turn it on our right wing.
In simulators like this, Instructors ambush crewmen with every conceivable emergency while they carry out the mission assigned them. As on the plane itself, more than 6,000 pounds of electronic countermeasure equipment are packed into the system. Employing this and defending the aircraft is a job that falls to the EWO, or Electronic Warfare Officer.
015.
January 1991. In the Persian Gulf, the virtual reality viewed through the scopes and scanners of American air forces will soon turn very real.
Christian, break!
24 hours before the air assault on Iraq, B-52 crews halfway around the globe prepare aircraft that will be the first launched in the war. Desert Storm marks a turning point in combat aviation. For the first time, pilots and machines using precision-guided munitions will bring an army and a nation to its knees. For the first time, ground forces will support those in the air, and not the other way around. Nearly 50 years after its inception, the Stratofortress will again play a vital role. Not to be left behind in the age of stealth technology and precision munitions, B-52s at Barksdale Air Force Base, Louisiana, are loaded with an entirely new kind of weapon, the CALCOM, or Conventional Air-Launched Cruise Missile. The missiles possess both an electronic map and upgraded satellite navigation capability. 35 CALCOMs will target Iraqi command and control systems, power plants, and supply bases. The Air Force won't release bomb damage assessment, but claims an accuracy rate of 80 to 90%. Precision-guided weapons are lauded as the key to Desert Storm. But in reality, 90% of the ordnance dropped are iron bombs, many a surplus from Vietnam. And before war's end, the Stratofortresses will drop more munitions on Saddam Hussein's forces than those expended by the RAF over Europe during all of World War II.
It was more of a feeling that, yeah, we're going to validate our existence. You know, everybody had been talking about B-52s going away for years and years and years, and now they're calling us in and say, hey, we need somebody who can do the job. And they asked the Buffs to go in and said, okay, we're going to get it done, do our job, get over with, and go home.
The first crews fly in at night and as low as 300 feet in hopes of slipping beneath the enemy radar net.
We did have Buffs hit targets very close to downtown Baghdad. The AAA was just lighting up the sky. Luckily, we were flying above most of it, but they had some larger stuff that was able to reach up to our altitudes, and we had to do a pretty good amount of planning to stay away from that and keep a sharp eye out for it. So on the first night when weapons started falling from the aircraft, it was the first time any of us had ever dropped a completely full internal and external load of weapons, and it seemed to take forever. We're sitting there watching the little bomber release light flicker, just going and going and going and going and going, and when it was ended, Ricky looked at me, we gave each other a high five, and pretty much universal, everybody said, let's get the hell out of here and go. You're feeling very pumped up, very alive at that point. You want to stay that way. As far as not being on the ground, a lot of people say it's not personal. Well, when you see SAMs and AAA 88 and 100 5mm coming at you, it gets pretty personal. It's my butt sitting here, and they're shooting at me. So.
I have no doubt we can do whatever we want to, wherever we want to, whenever we want to, but there's no reason to have somebody be a POW or killed.
I don't think there's any doubt about it. The Iraqi defenses were the toughest any Air Force has ever penetrated. But the importance of being able to project power from the United States, which the 52s did the first night of the war, bringing the air-launched cruise missiles in, when we needed to hit a lot of targets right at once was very important, and the day in and day out pounding that the 52 was able to inflict on the Iraqi army in particular was very important. There's a lot of anecdotal information that said the 52s were fundamental to the psychological warfare campaign we used to destroy the Iraqi morale.
Flying around-the-clock strikes, 52s concentrate on Iraq's Republican Guard. The mission rate is intense. On average, bombers arrive over enemy positions every hour and a half for 5 straight weeks. The CIA estimates that as many as 150,000 Iraqis die in the war. Most perish in the onslaught from above.
It's a target, it's a mission you've got to get done. I don't particularly like having to kill people, but if someone's threatening the United States or one of our allies, you know, that's our job.
Yeah, 470, you got friendlies in front of you with a wife. Yeah, I see them. Roger that. They're just...
A lot of people want to measure the effectiveness of the B-52s in their attacks against, say, the Republican Guards. I think the answer is they were very effective. And you got it from the prisoners of war after the war. One guy said, the B-52s absolutely destroyed the morale of my unit. And they said, were you hit by them? And he said, no, I wasn't, but I visited a unit that was.
I don't know what the hell to do with these guys.
Look at all the bombs the B-52s dropped, destroying the Iraqi morale. What was that worth in terms of lives of our soldiers that were saved because those Iraqi soldiers surrendered rather than shot?
In 6 weeks, it is nearly over. Saddam's vaunted army disintegrates beneath American air power. By the time the ground war is launched, it is apparent that the promises made by the advocates of strategic air power will, by and large, be kept.
Okay, today's mission was what we call breaching. Went against a minefield on the Kuwait-Saudi border. Why? Mission was to drop our weapons across a minefield to open a gap in it that can be later used for our troops to cross, and also to allow deserters and refugees from the other side over.
Using B-52s to clear a path through enemy trench works and minefields is never really successful. The cratered landscape that the bombers leave in their wake often proves unpassable to American ground units. Bomber crews do not come through the war unscathed. Early on, engine failure claims a Stratofortress on final approach. Of the 6 on board, 3 eject safely, 3 perish. Later, a B-52 is struck by 2 surface-to-air missiles. Miraculously, its crew survives.
It was just a mission to cut a rail intersection to block any possible retreat of the Republican Guards up near the Basra area. About a minute and a half after the target is when we first got the indication that there was some surface-to-air missile threats in the area. The Iraqis had gotten pretty smart, and they did not turn their radars on for any length of time. What I think happened was that they had highlighted the first 2 aircraft that had gone by to try to get some information as far as azimuth and altitude. And then when the 3rd ship came by, they highlighted again just momentarily and fired off a salvo of at least 4 missiles that we're aware of, and possibly 5. The thing that probably helped us the most was that early in the war I learned that you don't follow the aircraft in front of you, so we were offset quite a bit from that aircraft.
It was a classic SA-2 engagement. The same type of thing we trained for back in the States on our missions and on our simulators. I notified the crew immediately, began the countermeasures against it.
Everything was pretty much uneventful up until bombs away. The airplane shuddered like we were releasing another weapon. You know, the radar navigator had, and I confirmed that all the weapons were off, so nothing was hanging. And at that point, we knew we'd taken at least one hit. It was followed very quickly by a second shudder. We knew we'd taken the second hit.
Suddenly, the rest of the crew started reporting the damage and loss of systems on the airplane. We kind of realized that the situation was really deteriorating rapidly.
Quickly checked my personal equipment, tightened up my parachute tighter than it already was, got my helmet cinched down tighter, and basically, in my mind, reviewed the ejection procedures.
The wounded bomber, spewing fuel from shrapnel hits along its wing, is nursed home by its crew.
My biggest concern was the structural integrity of the wings of this aircraft. As you know, it's built so that the fuel provides most of the structural ability in that wing, and with that going out pretty quickly, I was concerned about lowering the flaps. When we did get down on the ground and the wings flexed down as they do when we slow down, the number one main tank began to empty out at a very excessive rate. And we stopped the aircraft, and the firemen came in and they hosed it down and plugged the leak. I think I'll personally send a thank you note to Mr. Boeing, who designed this airplane, because it held together really well. I wasn't too concerned about the situation until I read the maintenance report of all the near misses and the possible damage that could have been done, and the over 65 holes that were in the airplane. When I saw that, then I wish I could have had a cold drink of some kind. What happened here? Here.
The B-52 is going to be around for a long time. It's possible that it could be our last bomber, and it would certainly be a fitting tribute if no more bombers were required when the B-52 went out of service. There's a joke with the B-52s that when the last B-2 goes to Davis-Monthan for storage, the crew will be picked up by a B-52.
When it does retire, SAC's long rifle will best be remembered for the nuclear mission it never flew, and for the thousands of trips it made over a tiny Asian nation some 30 years ago.
When I first went to the wall, it was very, very difficult. I couldn't go down there without breaking off. It's very, very emotional laden. There's a lot of names down there of people, of really good people, very good friends that I used to fly with, used to raise cane with, and used to live with, be with. The gunner was in the tail of the aircraft, Charlie Poole. We don't know what happened to him. The navigator, Dick Cooper, who was sitting downstairs next to the radar navigator, again, I have no idea what happened to him. We never saw them again. We asked about them, and we were always given, well, there's many people up here, we don't know who all we have, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, but we have no idea, none of us do, as to what had happened to him to this day.